Good afternoon. I'm Gary Wise. I'm the Multimedia Production Manager at the McNay Art Museum in San Antonio. I was the one that kind of started this kind of roundtable discussion. This is kind of meant to be an informal thing. It's not meant to be where we lecture at you and then, and you're just supposed to absorb it. So it's very informal. We're asking as many questions as y'all are probably thinking, and how we're kind of doing it, and from various different fields. And with me is Perry and Sully, who's over there, and she works at the Balboa Park Online Collaborative. Right next to me is Anna Lavatelli, who is also at the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, and Bert, Drenth, correct? Degenhart, Drenth, is with Adlib, actually, information systems. So we come from different backgrounds. Both Anna and I generally are like the producers of these very large digital media files, and then of course Perrin's the one that kind of has to deal with them, and then Bert's coming from the commercial end of it. So, and if y'all have any questions at any time, just let us know. Okay. And I'm going to start, and how I'm going to start is, hello, there we go. Kind of a very brief history of computing, just to kind of give you an overview of kind of where we are today. And I kind of went through this, and looking at this. Does anyone remember these things? And the funny thing is that these things, they for the most part, were 1.44 megabytes. Okay, most people's thumb drives now are like much bigger than that. So, I mean, I'm carrying a 32 gig thumb drive in my pocket. So, it's needless to say, it takes, hundreds of stacks of these things to get to what I have in my pocket. Another one that maybe a lot of designers would probably know is the good old zip drives, and you heard the click, 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 click the whole entire time, and then of course they get stuck. The little metal thing would get broken, and like trying to force it out with a paper clip or something. I did that a lot. So, and then we keep going, and this is, we had floppy drives, and of course, if you were the cool kid, you got one of these. Hello. There it goes. The jazz drives, right? I remember getting my first jazz drive, and then it cost me I think $400 or $500 for a 2 gig jazz tape when they first came out. They were insanely expensive. I also remember getting my first external hard drive. That was I want to say it was like a 20 gig hard drive, external hard drive, and it was made for Apple. It had the Apple logo and everything on it, and it was $1,000. So it's come way down. Then of course now you can buy a couple terabyte hard drive, external hard drive for next to nothing now. But sorry. Another thing too that's also progressed as well is hello. The reason I'm talking about this is if anyone's familiar with Moore's Law, and there's a little chart here I was going to show you. I just pulled this from Wikipedia actually. So essentially it talks about every 2 years processors double in power and speed and the amount of processors. But of course we're already seeing a decline in that. What they say in the next couple of years, processors won't do that, and we'll be needing more power, but we won't get it. And also, too, the one I want to point out to you is the red line, where it talks about memory, right? 1970 needed nothing, and today, this is actually 2010. It's easily 4 gigabytes of just memory to run, essentially, operating systems and modern operating systems, and to run your applications and such. My computer that I work with at work, I have 32 gigabytes of memory on Mac Pro that sometimes I see it struggle with some of the stuff I'm making it do. So I say, okay, I hit render, I walk away for 30 minutes, go get coffee, and then come back, and then it may be done. So, so that's kind of where we're at, and then And the reason for this talk, might have these slides out of order. This is my first computer, by the way, was this guy.
Oh, yeah.
64. And then let's see. And this is what I actually have at work now. And actually it's changed because you see that this guy right here, it's a rated drive array. I have 4 of those now connected. And running eSAT on the back. So it's about as fast as I can go on that. So I'm constantly using between my laptop and bouncing between my laptop and my workstation back and forth, transferring files, doing maybe audio stuff on this side, or maybe doing some sort of animation stuff on this side, and then doing the bulk of the work on the editing station. So that's what I work with. And so it's it's been increasingly more and more apparent that I keep having to buy more and more drives because my work keeps getting bigger, bigger, and bigger. So so that's kind of what this talk is about, is that to find out what standards there are, or what standards there could be for these large media files that we have to work with. And what I do, and I was going to show you this, the file sizes are, as it does this nice little thing, from 1985, I had to look this up, and 1985, the file sizes for still images were about 20 kilobytes or so. For video, you're looking at maybe 500 kilobytes. In 1985, it didn't move much. I mean, images were still only a couple hundred kilobytes, and video was maybe a meg or 2. 95 was an important year. That's kind of also when a lot of the standards for video was coming out for files. And then in 97, of course, that's when we had the kind of explosion with QuickTime files and AVI and all that. So 2005, it grew a little bit with people still weren't shooting in HD, or at least people that weren't. It was too expensive for most people to gravitate to HD video. So everyone's still shooting SD. So most videos were 20, 30, 40, 50 megs, maybe 100 if you were pushing it. Image files were maybe a meg or 2. And you get today, where the average file size in 2012 for a video file is, I mean, it's 4,000 or 5,000 megabytes, or 4 or 5 gigs, and that's usually been already compressed down for whatever delivery it's doing. So, and sometimes the compression is really bad, and you can't reverse the compression once you do that. And so then of course, even image files are getting huge with everyone shooting RAW now, with like a lot of the inexpensive digital SLR cameras. A lot of them can still shoot RAW, and then the RAW is a huge file. And of course, everyone, as producers, everyone wants the RAW file because you can manipulate the RAW file as much as you want, and you don't lose the data in the RAW file, versus every time you work with a compressed file, it gets more compressed. And I know Anna's going to be probably talking about how things get more and more compressed the more you do it. How I work, because I have a staff of 2, myself and one other guy, and I do all the video editing in my department and for the entire museum. I also work with outside contractors as well, so I have to deal with them and what they're dealing with, and transferring files back and forth. I also work with our curators that we have, where we have new media artists that actually showcase their video artwork in either single or dual channel, and we have to deal with their work as not just as a collection item where we have to sign it in, the collection department has to come in, but we also did tell them this is the type of media file that we need from you in order to make that work. And I had to write it from scratch because there was no standard available. So I was like, well, this is what works in our system now, so let's just go there and let's move on. So So anyway, I just kind of, started this thing saying, okay, well, what are the standards? There aren't any, and I don't know what they are, and then so I'm just saying how I work. I do work primarily in HD now. It's gotten to a point where that's what everyone's doing. YouTube, you can upload to YouTube in HD. You can upload to Vimeo in HD. The problem we have though is that these HD files are very big. Even at the compressed state that you're turning them into an MOV file, which is a QuickTime file, or if you're turning them into like an MP4, which is the new codec that a lot of people are using, which is the H.264 codec. It's a problematic, because what do I do with a 50 gig file or a 100 gig file? I easily work with 100, 200 gig files at a time. Which is what causes my computer to be cranky at me a lot of times. Because we record, it was told by me from the board of my museum that they wanted to record everything. They wanted to videotape everything. All our lectures, all presentations, all our discussions that we have in the galleries, things like that. And it's a daunting task, especially with two people. And we do get it done, but of course these talks and discussions can be very lengthy. They can be anywhere from, the shortest ones we usually have are 15, 20 minutes, and they go on to 2 hours. So, well, you're shooting 2 hours at HD video, sometimes multiple cameras, because you'll set something up for like their slides, or you have two people, two cameras going to go back and forth. If it's like a little kind of coffee table discussion, or if it's like a panel discussion, things like that. So you maybe have two cameras going back and forth. Well, then you get these multi-clip kind of scenarios that you're working with. So you have multiple cameras, and then you have to bring them together and everything else. And if you do any animations on top of that, forget it. These files are gigantic, and you can't put them on a thumb drive because they're too big for those. You can't put them on a disk, because then you compress it to get it onto that disk, and then what do you do with it? So, and of course, the archivist that we have says, "Oh, you just need to save everything." And I'm like, I can't, I can't save everything. It's impossible. So what we've been doing actually is, I actually have, which it wasn't on the slide, but it's I have basically it's a bare bones hard drive reader. And what I do is every couple of months I go in there and just put a bare bones 3.5-inch hard drive, stick it in there, and just back stuff up to it, and then I kind of set it aside, lock it up, and then move on. So that's what I'm doing now. However, the problem I'm having is that, well, what do I save? And that's a question that's an ongoing question for me. I don't know what to save. I mean, do I just save the final outputted file, in the full whatever that I decided to make it in, like whether it's an MOV file or whatever, but it's like, is it the full outputted authored file, or do I also keep all the render files and the project and everything else? If you tell an archivist, they'll say, yeah, keep everything. And I'm like, but feasibility, it's not reasonable to do that because it's too big. So what I've been doing actually is been saving essentially the raw outputted file, the uncompressed or the least compressed outputted authored file, and then getting rid of the original project after a couple of months. Which the bad thing is that of course I can't go back and re-edit if I needed to, or I'm going back and it's already somewhat compressed and I have to re-edit, and then of course it gets more compressed. So, and then trying to leave it alone as much as possible. So that's what I'm doing. And I also do a lot of photography for my department, for my museum as well, and I shoot in RAW and JPEG, so I can give a JPEG to someone immediately, and then I have the RAW file to work with, and the RAW is what I try to keep, and I export that out, and I batch export that out onto those drives. But but the problem I'm having now is that I have stacks of drives that, already, and I've only been doing this archival process for about 8 months, and I have about 40 drives that are just stacked. So, it's becoming a problem, and this is why we kind of instituted this because to find out, well, what should we do, you know, and kind of it's an open-ended question. It's like, well, what should we start doing? So, and I'll hand it over to Anna, and
Sure.
and we'll go from there.
Yeah, click me ahead. Well, actually, let's have Perian contextualize
Yes.
Okay.
what we do at BPOC.
Yeah. So Anna and I are sort of halves of the same egg. I deal mostly with the collections media, and Anna does most of the production and cleanup and helps with management and advising me, you know, what a codec is. Because I came from the collections management background. I deal mostly with collection data. But I've moved into the digital world to help build a shared digital asset management system for all 30 partners of Balboa Park. So it's a big project, and so I've kind of had to leap in with 2 feet and see how well I can swim. So with Balboa Park, there's 14 museums plus a lot of other cultural organizations there in the park. We now have started branching out a little bit, and it's not just Balboa Park. We've got another partner or two in San Diego proper. And when we first got started 3 years ago, we asked, well, what do you guys want? What can we do for you? And they needed image digitization. Thank you, dear.
Thinking of the camera.
And image digitization of collection items, mostly flat stuff. We haven't quite gotten into the larger and 3D stuff yet. And video digitization. And it turned out that they had a lot of Beta, Betamax, Beta XP, U-Matic, VHS, DVD, all of these 16 millimeter, all of these types of video files, plus various sorts of audio files, things like dictabelts that we still haven't quite figured out the best way to digitize those. So right at the beginning, when we had money, we ended up purchasing something called the Sama Solo, which is produced by a company in, I think, North Carolina, called Front Porch Digital. And what it does is it takes whatever format you can throw at it. So, for example, we have an old U-Matic machine that we connect to this computer and play the tape, watch the output, see what it does, and you can set up which format you want it to digitize in. And it will do all of them at once, so that you're not having to re-render after you've generated this giant 150 gigabyte file, which for our purposes we ended up archiving in a format called MXF, which is a JPEG 2000 type video format. So we've got these ginormous files, plus a couple of an HD and an SD derivative in .mov format that we use for access copies. And we push the MXF files offline into some Drobos, and we're looking at some better storage solutions than having these Drobo hard drives sitting downstairs. I know. Anna and I have opinions about the Drobos. But, you know, that takes money, and for the short term it made sense. And so now we've got about 2,000 videos that are digitized. We also went in on a grant for a 16 millimeter film digitizer that the San Diego Air and Space Museum is using, and they've been getting some great, just some phenomenal video out of their archives. And so they've been storing those. We haven't gotten them because we haven't actually been doing the work. But one of the ongoing projects is to centralize into some cloud storage solutions at BPOC, so that we can have storage at the organizations, but then BPOC itself can also serve as backup, which makes everybody a little more comfortable. We've also got about 420,000 images of various sizes, from tiny little 80 pixel width JPEGs that somebody captured on a camera in 1998 of their collections, and nobody has redigitized that, up to giant 100 megabyte TIFF files that BPOC has digitized using a Canon Mark II 5D Mark II camera. We just have a rapid capture copy station. It's yay big. It takes great photographs of flat stuff, but it doesn't work so well for the three-dimensional objects. Again, with the raw files, which the camera produces, they're in a format called CR2. I convert all of those to DNG, which is a more open raw format, and we hope will remain accessible. And that's the problem with raw files or any original format, is that you don't know if the standard's going to change in 5 years, and then you have to go through and remigrate. Huh?
You know that.
Oh yeah, eventually. We just hope that that everybody is aware now that this file exists and that we need to continue supporting it for a while in some way. I know you're laughing at me.
Or just keep Adobe Photoshop version 6 on your computer.
Right.
For the rest of your life so that you can
And never upgrade
That-
OS.
I want to actually,
never upgrade.
I want to kind of chime in on the Adobe thing, because I do a lot of beta testing for Adobe on the new products and such. I usually get the developers edition and I work on it and say, no, this isn't working. This is not backwards compatible. Here's the problem: Adobe's pretty much going to start like with the new CS7 that's coming out supposedly in a few months. They're going to basically make it to where anything before 5 will not be readable. So just to give you a heads up, it's out of our control. It's the software companies that say, yeah, we're going to just keep moving on. So
But that's what I'm saying, if you do a version of 5.
right, but then when they don't support it anymore, though, it gets to the point where it gets buggy and you can't even open it anymore. So I have a problem with I have some old files from Poser that I can't open anymore because it got bought out by it's been bought out by 3 times, I think. You can't open up the old stuff anymore, even though you have the software, it just won't open. So the software just kind of quits.
Nice thing about films, you just need light.
Yeah. Yes. So.
By the way, just one note on the old tapes, on digitizing old videotapes. One of the problems that we ran into when we were trying to digitize all these U-matic tapes is I kept breaking the U-matic machine. I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I burned through like 4 U-matic machines. They're old, they're hard to find, and they're really expensive. Turns out I needed another $20,000 piece of software or a piece of hardware, which is a U-matic cleaner.
Yes.
Because the films oxidize, and so the oxidation on the film itself will clog the reader heads. So either you need to know how to do repair on your old machines and have all of this, I doubt that they still produce reader heads for U-matics, or just have a really good contract with your hardware servicer, which we did. It cost a lot, but we also sent it back a lot to be cleaned. So just be aware that the media itself may be a problem.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to talk about your side of it?
Yeah, my end of things. So on the U-matic thing, I used to clean heads of U-matic players.
All right, I'm handing you that box.
Yeah, no, it's been a long time. I don't know if I remember how to pull everything apart and put it back together. So I do the video production. I primarily work with the San Diego Museum of Art, although I do work for other museums. And so we have this, because we collaborate with multiple organizations, the system isn't so easy as when you work for one museum, because I want to make sure that everyone has discrete access and control of their files, so that if San Diego Museum of Art decided they wanted to not work with us anymore, we could hand them their hard drives that they've bought back to them, right? So we have lots of hard drives, and as far as, I mean, it's, I mean, you brought up the beginning of the issues that we have with, standards. And that's one of the biggest issues, is are there any standards? And so because, and there are no standards for large media files, because I came into, it's been less than a year since I came into Balboa Park Online Collaborative to start working with them, creating content, and it was a situation where it was sort of building something from scratch. So it was cool because I got to do that after Final Cut 10 came out.
Sorry.
There we go. Okay. So, Final Cut 10, I was one of these people who cried because it was like being left by, a lover of 10 years. I had been working on Final Cut since Final Cut 1. Before that was working on linear, tape-to-tape VHS, SVHS, and so it was really sad. But so I started testing with Premiere and Avid. Avid is an awesome piece of software, and I love it, but for small museum workflows, and when you're on a budget with your hard drives and space and everything, Premiere makes a lot more sense because it actually handles AVCHD and H.264 natively really well. So we don't transcode. Which saves an immense amount of space. It's really cool. So we just take our little SD card, pop it in the reader, drag the whole folder on into a project file for lecture by John Marchari with the date. And so we have this, file naming system that is date-based, descriptor-based, that Parian would probably, cringe a little looking at my folders. But because we're working with raw footage that's totally unviewable outside of edit software, they're .mts files, right, the AVCHD. And so nobody can look at them except for me with Premiere. That's a little problematic, especially for a DAMS if you want to be able to peruse your raw footage. So suddenly, okay, should we have been transcoding this last year? Do we need to sit down and transcode a year's worth of footage? So that's a question I think that's interesting is there a way to have this is crazy. I'm gonna just propose some big questions. Like, would it be possible to have a DAMS that would be like compatible with Premiere so that you could like preview stuff via another piece of editing software? Wouldn't that be awesome? These are some big questions I'd like to ask. We also shoot on a Mark II Canon 5D, and that's for more produced content where we want something that looks pretty and can be shown on a monitor in an education space or as a promotional piece for an exhibition. And we treat that the same way. We drag the whole card over from the CF onto the project folder and edit directly on the original footage, and then we have our export. And so the export, I don't trust Apple at all after being betrayed horribly by Final Cut 10. Broke my heart and left me in the cold. So I export to DNxHD. ProRes, big problem. I was working in Final Cut 7 as a freelancer for the San Diego Museum of Art before BPOC hired me. BPOC didn't have Final Cut 7, so I couldn't play ostrich like I know a lot of other fellow video producers are doing, where they're just staying in Final Cut 7 and waiting to deal with it until they have to deal with it. The problem is you're transcoding to ProRes. Problem with that is you can't open ProRes files if you don't have Apple software on your computer. So I can't open the ProRes final exports from my freelance days. So I have to go back onto my system and re-export those as either DNxHD, which is free and downloadable through Avid, or AVC Intra, or do we do like photo JPEG and start like having immense files? No, too big, right? And we're shooting on AVC HD, right? We're not shooting 444. We don't need to shoot 444. They're ugly lectures. It's somebody in a poorly lit room with some slides that we then cut in because otherwise the slides would be illegible. So there's all these issues of like really what quality do we need really in the end? Maybe an H.264 unlimited bitrate is the way to go because H.264 has been pretty widely accepted. But then again, like what comes next? And so again, establishing a standard, clinging to it, and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. And so I do the export DNxHD only for the produced content, so it's like a 1.5 minute really beautiful looking thing that maybe they'll want to have for broadcast someday for, I don't know why, they would want to go back to an exhibition and have a broadcast quality copy. But for lectures and things like that are only going to be distributed by web, I do an unlimited H.264. We don't have the space to have big files like that. So I did a little study. This was stuff that Parian gave me from the SAMA to do a test of exports. I took a 1 hour video that was 14 point, and this is standard definition, right? So like we're talking 720 by 480. And so it's 14 gigs for a 1 hour video and about 2 gigs for the 15-minute video. And those are motion JPEGs in a QuickTime wrapper. So I took that, plopped it into Media Encoder, which I really like, by the way. Adobe Media Encoder, like what was compressor? That was a joke. Apple didn't know what they were doing. So we did an MP4 unlimited bit rate, and then I did some smaller bit rates. They're more web friendly. And just looking at the file size, so you actually like increase in file size when you go to an unlimited bit rate MP4, which is interesting. And then we go to, actually these can't be the motion JPEGs, can they? The MOVs. I'm just looking at the file size.
No, I didn't give you the.
Yeah,
I just gave you the compressed.
Okay, and we don't know
the
what
HD compression.
I don't remember what codec they are. I'm sorry. They were a big codec, I promise you, but not as big as an unlimited MP4. And then looking at the unlimited H.264 versus the MP4, just a straight MPEG-4. So it's interesting. And then if we look at stuff I'm producing and the file sizes, and I just did a test. I usually don't do lectures at DNX HD, but it would be 100 gigabytes a lecture. If I did DNX HD exports. Since we record every lecture, same thing as you, I get a call from San Diego Museum of Art. We don't ever want to not record anything ever again. Awesome. Do you want to buy a $2,000 server for me? We need somewhere to put this stuff because I don't believe in deleting raw footage. I don't think it's a good idea. I think we need to hold on to that stuff. So right now what we have are active RAID 0 drives that are our work drives, and then we back up to a RAID 5 server, and then I back as projects are finished, they're backed up to LTO tape. So that way we always have cold storage because I'm scared of cold storing hard drives. And so we look at the 1 minute, 1.5 minute, and so that was a promo. So the first one was shot on AVC HD. The second one, because it was a promo, was shot on H.264. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, big files. I said that. So then I did, it's with the light you can't really see, but I did a screen grab of just opening up all the files that I exported and just looking at the variants. You can see there's slightly different points in time, but it's basically the same moiré at the end of a tape. The moiré was really useful because you could see really where the pixels were starting to come in. And then in color shift, this is the HD footage, same thing. Those are all those exports I had the screen grab of before. And so looking at how the color shifts between different bit rates and codecs. So like standards are out the window. What are we gonna do? I don't know. That's all. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I can add some problems to
Add some problems.
to the equation, because quite frankly, I think that all those problems with media types and storage, etc., they will be solved. They'll be solved. But the problem that we really get is once you have all those files stored somewhere, how do you know what's in it? Mm-hmm. So, in other words, how do you create metadata that in a decent way tells you that in this particular file somewhere there's an interview with this and this person, and that might be relevant at some time for some other production. So just having the storage and the encoding solved is just part of the problem. So I first got involved in this while we started a project for the British Film Institute. And they have a couple of million films that they are slowly and surely digitizing. They've got their digitization sorted out. They do that using a professional scanner. They store the stuff on a RAID array for immediate access on a small format, and high definition formats they store on LTO tape, which is controlled by a robot. So they've got that more or less sorted out. But the problem is then how do you create metadata for it, and how deep do you want to go? Mm-hmm. And so they used our collection management system to describe their videos, and we immediately had to make some changes. The fact that you can show stills in a collection management system is, well, almost standard now these days, but we had to change our image viewer into a media viewer so that it would not only allow stills to be shown in the collection management system, but also video. So we built that in basically using a media player from Microsoft as an embedded component. And then you get the problem, okay, how do you describe these things? So you also need to use the controls that you can actually, in the metadata production, scroll through the file in a quick way, and then create in and out points and describe that scene or maybe that fragment, and then store those descriptions in a hierarchical fashion, so that in that way you create more or less a degree of depth of description the way you like yourself. So you might create one record for a complete movie, but you might also divide a record into maybe 20 segments, and those segments themselves can be subdivided in scenes or whatever, and you can create a whole hierarchy tree for that. And that's something that we learned from that project, and we've now built that in our collection management system. I think that's something that we'll see in the near future in more of these systems. And we found it quite a challenge to work with time-based media, especially because there's no way to, well, there are tools that do sort of scene detection, but still you have to manually describe what you see. Apart from if you have things subtitled, you can index the subtitling, so that's a helpful, almost a free text search into the files. So that's what my little piece to this problem space.
Yeah, one of the nice advantages about having a digital asset management system is that depending on the software, you may or may not be able to get to that level of description unless you do have subtitles. But most collection management systems, not certainly a few, don't have the capacity to really work as a real media player yet, and so the nice thing about the dams is that we've been able to use it as our way of adding descriptive metadata and pulling that information in from the collection management systems. So what we do is we end up having the content creators, the museums themselves, describe these materials as they digitize them and as we digitize them for them, so that we know that when we finally push it out to the web or push it out to the rest of their staff, they'll be able to find what they need.
So, is there any questions right now, or I mean, we want to kind of open this up to what y'all are thinking, what y'all thoughts are. This is really kind of an open-ended kind of thing. So, go ahead.
Did you guys try Glacier on Amazon?
I looked into it because we actually don't, at my museum, we do not have a digital assets management system. Our CMS is an older, it's actually an old version of Burnin. It's a text-based version of Burnin. Yeah, that's how old it is. So I go in there, and my archivist that works in my museum as well, we're always butting our heads against the wall a lot of times because we're like, we really need to get something going, you know. And we actually looked at Glacier, and there's some issues with Glacier that I've found, especially with, like, on my end, where I deal with these very large media files. A lot of it deals with throughput and bandwidth issues. Trying to upload something like that to technically the cloud with Amazon is not feasible. It really isn't.
They have the direct connect and their import export.
Right.
It doesn't 10 gig.
But facilities wise, with how our throughputs are basically right now, our upload speeds and such, I would be hogging the network the entire time. And there's 60 other computers being using the network at any given time at my museum. So it kind of, I would basically be killing everybody's network upload and download rates just to try to upload. Even if I try to schedule it, it gets dealing with the IT manager who has all this stuff going. Like, he does all his updates and everything else on his servers at night, so it doesn't bog things down. It's problematic, and I haven't looked at Glacier in a few months, and supposedly maybe some of the stuff, it seemed a little glitchy at the time when I looked at it. It of course now could be much better. So I haven't looked at it since then, but we're in the process of now trying to figure out a digital asset management system, actually looking at getting one. So that's where we're at now, but we're evaluating everything else. So, but yeah, we're kind of, we don't have one. So we're like, that's why I'm still doing essentially all local storage on everything. So, and so metadata right now for me is, I'm cataloging metadata myself, building essentially a database from scratch. I'm actually using, I'm just using FileMaker to make essentially a simple database for the stuff that I'm collecting. And the nice thing is, since I'm doing it all myself, I do all the shooting for the most part, and or the editing. I already know what we shot, so it's pretty easy for me to kind of catalog. that stuff versus handing, like what a lot of museums do. They, someone maybe does the shooting, but then someone else is handling the metadata, of cataloging this and that. Since I'm still doing it all myself, it's easier for me to just type it in. But yeah, like I said, we don't have one yet, so we're still looking at it.
But bandwidth remains a problem. The BFI uses our software in a hosted environment. We host it on our servers. And guess how they get the films into our system? They just mail the hard disks in the post. And it's the fastest way, really, because the internet just isn't fast enough to get the files to us.
Although, admittedly, if you're lucky and you're close to a university, BPOC is very happily talking to UC San Diego about joining Internet 2 just to deal with get the big gun out to the bandwidth issues. But right now we're running on a 50 megabit connection, which is great, but we also have the same issues. We've been looking at Glacier as well to try to get away from the Drobos, and we do have RAID storage, but it's only really for access.
Yeah, it's funny
storage.
that you have 50 megabits per second, and we're running at 5 megabits download and 1.5 up. So, yeah. We've had some issues with what the service provider that provides our actual internet connection and such. So, but yeah, we generally at any given time we're running to 1.5 megs up. So that's so for us trying to upload files is impossible for us to do it right now. It has to do with our service provider that's providing our connection. Yeah, it's there's only really two in San Antonio. It's AT&T and Time Warner. And yeah, exactly. Everyone rolled their eyes since I said those two names. So exactly what we have to work with. So we're kind of like, I mean, we're running fiber throughout the museum, but at least in the new wing, and then the rest of it's all Cat 6. But yeah, we're still having issues. And in fact, in my office, I actually can't. I don't have any cable drops in my office at all. So we're running off of Wi-Fi in my office. So that's another problem as well. So yes.
So you were saying how your board sort of made the institutional decision to keep everything, and that's great. So it's nice to have sort of like the top end institutional client for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But when it gets down to the practical nuts and bolts, the realistic stuff, like when we do it, we have to sustain it, keep it, and pay for it. Where, in your experience, where does that conversation go? Is the onus on? Are you different from the IT department? Is the IT department involved? I mean, I know at our institution, there's always this battle of like who's going to pay for the equipment, whose responsibility is to maintain the equipment. Like, how do we build it in?
Right.
Even if the directive is coming from the top, like.
It's funny because we have an IT manager that's separate from my department, and even though he and I talk, we're relatively a small museum, I guess, in terms of staff. We have, I think, about 120 staff, which sounds like a lot, except that like 2/3 of those are the guards. So, there's like the IT manager runs the IT department by himself. And then, like I said, I have one person that helps me, but I also run all the AV services for my museum. I also run all the lighting design for my museum. I also do all the multimedia integration for my museum. I do also run all the social media for my museum. So, to go back to your question, I do have several members of the board that I know personally because of having to work with them, that they just love technology, which is a good thing. I have a pretty substantial budget when it comes to purchasing equipment. I just don't have a budget for staff. So I usually can get stuff that I pretty much need for the most part, at least equipment-wise. And the way our accounting system works is basically anything over $500 is considered a capital expense, and pretty much 9 times out of 10, anything I ask for, I get, which is good. But the other thing is then I have to be very selective of what I really do get in order to make what I do work for us. And so they wanted to do all this stuff, and then the curators were on board on this. The director was on board of, yeah, we want to record everything and just keep it, and it's like, that's great, but you know, I had to make some decisions, and myself and with other members of the staff that say, well, we can record everything and we can keep everything, but we can't like keep all of the like the render files and things like that. It was just not going to happen. It's cost prohibitive for us to do that. I mean, it would be insane to try to keep all that. But so what we do is we just kind of doing what we're doing now, and I'm trying to look for better ways of figuring that out, and I'm kind of going through like these growing pains of do we add servers, you know, that I just have access to, and we're talking about that right now, and we, you know, putting a couple of sands, that's all I have, you know, and stripe those sands down to, you know, RAID 5 and, you know, or RAID 10 even, and then just kind of, and that's what I have, and it's a multimedia thing, and have it, you know, and then have it in 2 locations. So if the museum burns down, God forbid, you know, we have the stuff elsewhere. But right now, cloud storage for us is we would love to have it, but technical issues with uploads and bandwidth and other things, it's just not feasible for us. Because I mean, I have literally from the stuff that when I archive, and like I said, I just started really archiving a lot of the stuff, you know, several months ago, and I think I have about 200 terabytes of stuff. Yeah. So.
Can I ask you a question? I got a little confused about
Sure.
the file types.
Uh-huh.
So we have the raw footage.
Correct.
And that's in whatever the camera, the capture camera.
Correct. Actually, yeah, it's a misnomer of what you think is raw footage, coming because cameras actually do a lot of compression themselves, especially with like digital SLR footage. They have a codec that's built into the camera. I shoot, like, unlike what Anna shoots, I shoot with professional 3-chip cameras, like kind of like the one behind us, and I shoot with those, and I bypass the camera's codec and I go straight to external drives that are used with, like, I use Blackmagic Design is what I use. There's like other people that do that, like cinemas, things like that. People that are making movies are doing this now, where they bypass the camera's codec and it's straight 100% raw footage coming from the sensor, which is a lot bigger than what you get with
Which is similar to how still photos is captured.
Correct.
Okay, so you have that.
Mm-hmm.
From there, then you're bringing it into an editing software. Correct?
Yes.
And then you're creating an uncompressed authored file.
Correct. Well, it's not really necessarily uncompressed, but it's compressed as little as possible, I guess. Okay. is the best way to say it.
Yeah. So, and that has whatever file type that software produces.
Not necessarily.
So you can save as.
Basically, yeah, you can export as whatever codec and container you want from softwares, and so that's where I like to I think that's why we decided to both be on here, because I do things completely differently, because I don't think having uncompressed footage of lectures or certain things that are just for web matters. I don't think you need that quality, and I think it's an excess of space, and so I use that same camera but with the SD card that's highly compressed, and then I export something that's rather compressed.
Again, one more time to have like playback, like an MLV. That plays, okay. So, having said that, there are, I don't know if you've looked at any of the stuff that's come out of the Tate Modern. They've done a ton of work on looking at digital art that's created in the digital format. Plus also going back and migrating old formats, which were pretty much what you're doing, converting, you know, film or early pneumatic tape, moving up, and then migrating them forward. They've written a ton of standards and guidelines for that. So I recommend everybody take a look at that. And then there's professional organizations that are really based out of the archives profession that have been doing this for a long time. Sound recordings, and there's also ISO standards now for recording for archival purposes from a preservation and migration. So not only do you have to, in some cases like your project, where you're having to migrate old copies that are already obsolete to a current, plus you're producing, and then that's going to, you have to also for where that's going to migrate for in the future. So you want to stay with these standards that have emerged, and there's documentation out there. So I think you'd be well.
One thing I would like to put out, I've actually read the Library of Congress standards that you're mentioning. Library of Congress actually has one as well. The problem is that our technology is moving so fast, our software is moving so fast, they can't keep up. I think that's almost about 10 years old. 10 years ago, it's a huge difference than it is today, and it just keeps getting worse. So I think that's why.
So wouldn't you want to try to get the most sustainable file?
And that's the thing,
Right,
there isn't one.
There isn't one right now. There's too many of them. There's too many. She works in like DNX HD for you know. Are you on CS6 or CS5?
CS5.
For Premiere. I can work in DNX HD, but I'm still working in Final Cut Pro 7, so I'm working in ProRes. So, but I also have Media Composer now as well that also works.
Which is DNX HD.
Which is DNX HD as well.
There's
So.
no file that you can render that you both could use.
Well, yes, we can. Yeah, we can render it in DNX HD.
I don't. You know, that's the problem, because it's like these unofficial standards, right? And so DNX HD, because it's Avid and the movie industry works in Avid, I'm like, oh, I can trust that because people are using it, and they're using it commercially, and they're using it a lot. And so because Premiere can support DNX HD, because Avid has it open like that, I immediately latched onto it because I can't trust Apple. I can't trust ProRes because I can't open those files unless I have Apple software on my computer. And with Lion, you can't buy QuickTime 7, which used to be the patchwork fix for that, because you could spend $30, buy QuickTime 7, and then you have an Apple video product on your computer so that you can use ProRes. But you can't do that with Lion because it doesn't support QuickTime 7. They screwed us. Yeah.
I'd just like to kind of expand on that a little bit and touch on that.
Yeah.
The Society of American Archivists, on their website, you can search for any term you want in the whole universe on their search, and it'll bring up every single white paper they've ever published on that topic. So if you type in 264, you know, leaving out the H or the X or whatever you want, you get all the papers on, you know, H264, X2, the whole thing, and you get to see what their workflow was and why they decided to pick a certain way of going and doing things. I think we can all agree that if everybody did uncompressed AVI YV12, we'd be all happy campers because it'd be able to be used forever. But that's just not feasible. Have you looked into Have you looked into network attached storage at all?
The NAS, yes.
Yeah, I mean that's probably, in my opinion, is the best way to go about doing things because you can add things on. You can add a node on like it's absolutely, it's nothing. And you can RAID those together effortlessly.
Yeah, that's our RAID 5 backup as a NAS.
NAS, perfect.
Yeah.
So, I want to say that.
Yeah, and
That's what we're looking into.
I get to-
getting for us
Yeah.
is
the cheaper ones are simply not fast enough.
Agreed.
So
you need an enterprise. You need an enterprise NAS. essentially.
and those are really expensive. So
Right.
Not for live editing, but for storage. That's what
Yes.
we use it just for storage.
Right.
No active
Yes.
editing. So I do active editing on RAID 0. And I have the advantage because I'm not inside a museum. I can just charge the museum. So I say, oh, you want to record everything? We need to get a NAS server. And that's just for backup. And so I do things at a very, they don't have the money, but at least I can force them to, put their money where their mouth is when they have that. So sort of point to your question.
Yeah, but the cost of redigitizing and trying to somehow reclaim all that is going to be way more than the cost of doing it right the first time.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I'd like to mention about any enterprise storage, there's an upgrade path that ends. At some point, you can't get disks for it anymore. You have to go through the whole system and add to it. And then you have hardware support that you find lacking. Your parts start breaking, you can't replace them. You actually have to do a full swap out to make it work in the long term.
Right.
That's a lot of money.
But that's actually what we did is that we and I'm just talking from my IT manager's perspective. When he came in a few years ago, they actually had NAS storage, enterprise storage system, and it was a dual system to where it was mirroring each other as total fail-safe backup. Yeah, it was an old system from HP, and it started having problems, and HP didn't support it anymore. So we had to get a grant to we went to a SAN system, scale, area network, and storage area network, excuse me, and did the same kind of thing, and trying to make sure that what the nice thing is that the way this one's set up is that you can just swap hard drives out. It's real simple. You can do it on the fly, things like that. But they were $50,000 each, times 2, so you have that dual, making sure everything's fail safe. It doesn't matter, if one dies, you still have the other SAN that kicks in right away. It's $100,000, and then you still have to have. Then he didn't want to have to manage that whole thing himself, so we also have a management thing that we have basically a tech company that comes in and helps manage that, doing all the software and all that stuff for us. We don't necessarily do it all. He doesn't have to do it all himself, and so there's a maintenance contract for that as well. That's $20,000 a year. So it's not exactly. So if anything fails, they just replace it, and it's free for us. But it's an expensive endeavor, unfortunately. But that's the only way to get something that's actually quick, and they're fast, they're reliable, things like that. We're looking at that on my end for archival purposes as well. We just haven't gotten the money yet, basically. So.
It seems like for the cost of all that, you should be able to justify like your own 100 meg line that's just for you. Just play with the cloud as much as you want. Because then you don't have to maintain the hardware or the SAN or the NAS or pay a company to maintain that hardware. You let Amazon deal with it and pay the monthly fees or whatever it is. They only charge you when you take stuff out of place, not when you put it in.
Right.
But I'm just curious if you can sort of just the cost comparison. It seems like that's where everything's going.
Yeah, everything seems to be moving there, moving to the cloud. It's just I think right now it's just. The problem you have is that throughput, I think, in bandwidth, is not the same in every city. I mean, we're having problems with bandwidth, and we're trying to. It's either ridiculously cost prohibitive to go to, like, say, 100 megs.
And there's also a psychological factor. I mean, the fact that you keep your own files on some piece of hardware that you actually own is still. I mean, it's trust.
Right.
Yeah, and one concern, although I'm very much in favor of cloud storage, for obvious reasons, I hope, is the concern is that if you do have to migrate to a new standard, as happens, if you are working on a glacier, you're still now having to spend all that time pulling it back down. And which causes.
Well, and
I see it as the backup.
Yeah,
that's where I put the cloud. I like for my personal work and my freelance work, because I produce a ton of content on my own outside of BPOC. I have the Backblaze Unlimited, $100 a year, just as a third location. I still have my backup drives and my main work drives, and then that's a third place because I don't have an LTO tape recorder in my house, and so at BPOC I use LTO tape. But I think the cloud is something that could serve the same purpose because LTO it's the same thing. You're like, oh crap, we need that project file that's no longer like available on a drive. You're screwed because if you're gonna find it and then take a week to download it back.
And also, well, the advantage of spinning disks is that they're checked continuously. LTO, well,
it sits there.
It sits there. So you also should check those from time to time.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's a rule in the computing world. It's called 3-2-1. Back it up 3 times on 2 different devices, and one device needs to be in a different location.
There's even one more important law. That's the law of conservation of misery.
Yeah. So.
You fix one thing, it breaks somewhere else.
Yes, exactly. So I mean that's
so true.
So that's where we're kind of at right now. What time do we have?
We have half an hour to keep rambling.
Okay. So anyone have any suggestions or what they're working on or?
Cloud storage for everything except video. We do keep video locally at Lavatelli, but for our jam system and everything, it all runs off of images that we have at Rackspace. So they don't live near me.
Yeah.
Sometimes makes me a little nervous. I do have my own Drobo that I keep things on that nobody knows about. Just because if the internet goes down and somebody needs an image and I can't get at it.
Yeah, that's.
So there's that as an issue as well. Keeping something locally just in case the internet and the entire museum goes down we have an earthquake or whatever. But the video stuff we haven't found a decent solution for because of the size of the files themselves.
Right.
That sending them to Rackspace doesn't really make sense for us.
Right. Well, and it's funny that you brought up Rackspace because Rackspace is actually based out of San Antonio, and they have the same bandwidth issues that we do, and they're on a they're on a like a massive like they're on a massive like they're on a massive fiber trunk, but they're the backbone and they still have issues because I've talked to some of the system designers over there and the system managers, and they're like, yeah, we have the same problem. But
servers are in Illinois.
Yeah, but it's like they still have they have issues trying to connect to the different server farms and stuff like that too. So and they're paying ridiculous amounts of money for their
There are really
their
beautiful
service.
things about keeping everything in the cloud.
Yes.
But there's also, like I said, it's as simple as your internet connection going down and then what.
Yeah, exactly.
Just one note on the Drobos, because I do like to rag on them.
I hate Drobos.
See,
They bought me.
yeah. Well, we mostly use them for cold storage, just for, we don't access them. I only use them for raw image files, and then we've got 2 for raw image files. Each one's 12 terabytes. And then I've got another one for video, for those big video files. And what we found is that it seems to be fine for the smaller image files, even though there's, 150,000 large DNG files on it. But for video, they crawl with the large files, and they kept breaking on us. So we haven't found them to be as successful for video as for.
Yeah, I actually had Drobos originally, and because the IT department had them, and they said, well, we're not using them. We moved over to the SANs, things like that. And they're like, and I immediately told my boss, who is also my boss is the COO of the museum, and he's also the comptroller, so he's the one that controls the money. And I basically put him on his desk. Said, I can't use these. They literally, I could not even write to them. They took forever to write to. So he said, well, just figure out something and come back to me. So I'm using rated drive arrays that they're the Hitachi, they're the G drive arrays, and I'm running actually with eSATA on them. So I'm running at 3 gigabits per second. So I'm pretty quick. Yeah.
It makes my backups back.
Right.
They're great in a pinch.
Yeah.
Just in case I can't get anything out of my digital asset management system, because all of my images in the asset management system is
And just on the cloud.
as well. It doesn't live at Lockwood either.
Right.
So if I can't access the internet, I can't access any of it.
Can I go back to my little metadata hobby? What kind of metadata standards are you using for time-based media? Are you guys familiar with EBU Core or SEN or?
I'm not sure.
Nothing.
Yeah. See, like and like I said, we don't even have a digital asset management system at all. So like I said, I just created a simple query database, using FileMaker Pro, to say, okay, it's going to be. I put like date, I put when shot, and it's like, is it shot 1 or is it shot 2, camera 1, camera 2? Is this a lecture? Was this through the education department, or was this through promotion, from the PR department, or is this from development, or is this from the curatorial staff, or, so all I did was just do that, and it just created essentially these fields, and then I just immediately I selected it, basically. I just made it to where I just made a drop-down list, very simply, like, okay, this is curatorial, this is and I just, put the date in there and all that. And that's what I've been doing, and then and then a lot of times I'll also put what are they talking about, whether is it an artist, or is it the artwork, or is it what part of exhibition is it in, things like that. And I just did a very simple database, not even remotely close to like what most commercially available. So, and that's what I'm doing now, and just to kind of keep that. And I'm hoping what I can do is just take that and just be able to import that into whatever digital asset management system we get, at least import the data. And so
we've been able to use CEWA to get at least not all of the technical, because again, knowing still film, I imagine there's a lot of technical metadata
Yes, there is getting access to that. Sometimes even in like a lot of the nonlinear editors is a pain at times too. Trying to read all the.
But it's there.
It's there, yeah.
Okay. So we're doing all the descriptive and administrative stuff in our regular CMS that we can just do the description of what it is, what it's made of, its physical format, and then we're going to store it, its paths.
And do you then use hierarchical decomposition of those
We don't
media?
we wouldn't burrow down that far, unless it was. There are some times where, as Bert was saying, that if you had subtitles, you could break it right apart, just like you could for any object that had multiple parts. You could just use the same structure and use a thesaurus or control vocabulary.
Sure.
Formats.
Yeah, we do the same thing, but moving all those metadata fields regardless of the type of organization into CDWA Lite.
Yeah.
When you create derivatives of these video formats for changing from one format to the other, does that embedded metadata go with it, or do you have to create that?
Technical metadata should stay with it.
Well, it depends. It really depends on the transcoder.
Yeah.
So I feel like
So you have no guarantee that it will end up.
When you transcode something to some other file format, metadata is usually gone. It's only in the raw footage that the metadata is there. Just like it is like a raw digital still file, for like a digital SLR camera. The metadata is there in the raw file, but it's never there in the JPEG. JPEG has no clue what it is. It's just a JPEG.
Right.
That's all it is. Same thing in video formats. Once you export out, once you get rid of like either DNX HD, or when I still also shoot a lot in ProRes as well. That data is there, but once that goes away and it gets written down to something else, it's gone. You don't know what it is. I mean, at least the technical metadata that's there, the EXIF files, things like that, are gone. They're not there. You can't pull those back up. And then that's the other problem too, is that the more you derive, so if you took, say if I took my file, if I took a DNX HD file, and wrote it down to a QuickTime movie file, and it's let's say it's a large QuickTime movie file. It's going to be like projected in a gallery space, okay, which I would do it at like 1080p. So, but then they also they want it on the web. So if I don't go back to the original file, right, that I had, the DNX HD file or even ProRes, and I went to say the movie file that I had that's in the gallery, and moved it to I want to do it at 720p on the web at MP4. You compress it so much down, which is what Anna was showing here. You start losing more and more and more information, and it gets progressively worse with video. It's exponential. Yeah, exactly. You get major color shifting. A lot of times you get audio out of sync. I've had that happen a lot. And sometimes I get stuff from, because we also deal with video artists as well a lot of times, or I get stuff from other people that I have to integrate in or whatever. And it's like, and audio starts to drift, and I spent hours trying to get the audio back to sync, and it's a nightmare to do that, because they gave me a file that was already heavily compressed to begin with, and then I have to reformat it for something else, and I don't have the original file to work with, the original data to work with, essentially.
That is kind of one of the very nice advantages of having a DAMS, is that the DAMS can do that for you from the original file, or at least the original process. Not the raw footage, but the good master derivative.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that brings up an interesting point about what you choose to archive to. What do you feed the DAMs that it's going to build derivatives from? And I guess that brings us, back around to the beginning, right? What are you going to export at?
See, I was right about the law of conservation of
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's cyclical, and that's why I'm adamant about keeping my project files in raw footage, because I can always open up the project file in Premiere, and I know I'm going straight from what the camera got in the first place to create a new derivative. And so I'm never creating, these are actually, with the HD examples, they're not derivatives from the first digitization, they're straight out of the project file. And so in the way the Premiere workflow operates, you're opening up the project file and saying, okay, I need a DNX HD, I need one for YouTube, I need one for iTunes. and then you're going straight from your original footage again. So that's why we work in that model, because we don't have the file space to do the transcodes, and so instead we're keeping these little 16 gigabyte ABC HD batches from a lecture, or even less than that. Sometimes it's just 4 gigabytes of original footage from a 15-minute gallery talk. And then maybe it's like 2 shots of B-roll. But then there's like, we were talking about this earlier, the B-roll. What about the, how do you incorporate metadata into the B-roll, the supplemental stuff you shoot, so that you're not going back and shooting that really famous El Greco painting every time you have a video that features it, because it needs to be contained within that project file. What do you do? And so we're like playing with, okay, do we transcode specific, like how do you have that hierarchy? How do you tag stuff for that? And then do you transcode that and put that in a location on your dams as the raw footage B-roll, like stuff we know we're going to use over and over again, but then you've already transcoded it from the original file, and so it's like you're just chasing your tail.
So can I go back to your slide of Moore's law?
Sure.
Please.
If we look at that, and I have a feeling that we're with time-based media, video and audio, we're a little bit at the same stage as the early phases of digital photography. So what will this landscape be in 5 years' time? What's your idea about that?
Well, the problem we're having now is that, I mean, I've been doing video for a number of years, and I've seen it. And I've been on actual like movie sets where, like for documentary films, things like that, where we actually shot on Panavision 35mm cameras, or Ariflex cameras, things like that. So I know that on that side as well. So, and then I would say from 10 years ago to now, and I've talked to people that are kind of still in the movie industry themselves, and they're like, everyone's like, everything's been thrown out, and like we're starting over from scratch. And the movie industry is doing that. Well, and they're a multi-billion-dollar business, and so the stuff's gotten cheaper, but then everything keeps changing. Like every time I turn around, everything keeps changing. Like perfect example, I'm still running on Final Cut 7 for most of my projects. I had Final Cut 10. I really don't like it. So I'm like, okay, where do I go now? So I got a free copy from Avid on Media Composer, and then I'm like, crap, I got to relearn another program and edit again on another computer system, on another software system. And it's like, this is a pain, And so it's just, I think it's just going to get. I think software itself is going to be more exponentially faster and change a lot faster. Codecs are going to change a lot faster versus the hardware. I think the hardware at this point we're kind of leveling off. It's the software that we're having an issue with. And I think a lot of times, and even right now, I mean, I'm running a 12-core processor Mac Pro, okay, with 32 gigs of RAM. I have 40 terabytes stuffed into the computer itself, and then I'm running several terabytes outside, and it struggles, So the hardware is already struggling to the current software that we have, or the latest software that we have. What it's going to do in 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and like most museums, you get strapped for money, and you can't keep buying, a $12,000 computer every time you turn around. It's where do you go? So I think that's where we're at. Is that I think everything keeps changing, but the hardware's not keeping up now with the software and the new codecs and everything else. So there's no easy answer. I don't know. I mean, it's it's the software, that adage like, well, fix it in software, fix it in hardware kind of thing that, IT always loves to do, or these computer companies like to do. Well, I don't think it's, they don't like to talk to each other, and, they're doing their own thing, and so like, we're kind of stuck in the middle. So, but yeah, that's kind of where I think the software is going to grow much faster, what the software can do versus what the hardware is able to keep up with. So, and when it comes around back to this, where we're having to deal with storing all this stuff and archiving this stuff, it's a huge challenge. It's a huge problem, and so that's, I guess, the point of this whole thing. So, I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Isn't there a damn luncheon sometime?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Wonderful. We should figure out to throw that out there.
And how do you see collection management systems and dam systems approaching each other?
I think that's a good pairing.
That's a pairing question.
Personally, I see that we're starting to get to the point where the relationship between a DAMS and a CIS are converging, and necessarily so, because so much of our museum information is now image or media based, that they have to start cooperating, and so legacy CIS are going to need to catch up to this ability to bring in all of that media information. Likewise, DAM systems need to be able to easily take the information in whatever format a CIS of any sort, if it's CSV or text files or a straight database dump, be able to read that information. Right now I'm doing manual exports out of 3 different collection information systems and formatting it to get it in.
I was just going to say, for what we're doing, we're building everything from scratch, from the ground up, and we view everything that goes in the system as an artifact. And you can really break it down into 3 categories: physical, digital, and abstract. So if you really look at everything as an artifact, it really makes everything a lot easier, and integration almost seamless. As long as you have the metadata, modules or standards in place to be able to account for all of that information for every single category that is presented to you.
Yeah, I actually, 8 years ago projected that collection information systems, that's what I did my master's thesis on, was that collection information systems would end up taking the lead in adopting a lot of DAM's workflows and essentially become this big hybrid thing. Hasn't happened that way. It's kind of gone the other way around, and the DAM systems have been better placed to really innovate in this realm.
But the collection systems are ridiculously necessary.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is why they have to talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm perfectly fine with having 2 separate systems, but without having the CMS information go into my DAM system, because I'm not going to enter all that stuff, and I'm not going to update it manually. I mean, I can, but I don't want to. But I also know that if someone wants, people are going to use different systems. Different people in the museum are going to either gravitate towards the CMS or the DAMs, and I would like information if it's updated in my DAMs by a handful of people to also migrate to the CMS, as well as if information in the CMS is updated, that it migrates to the
Yeah, we're
we're
starting to get to 2-way conversations instead of just from the CIS to the DAMs for collection information.
The way that I see it is that a collection information system is not a DAMS, and a DAMS is not a collection information system. However, having said, they also have both 2 distinct user interfaces. One that is particularly appealing for media people, and the other one for collection people. Having said that,
isn't necessary in the DAMs. I mean, you don't need necessarily like the legal information or the insurance information.
Having said that,
or all of the things that go along with art objects that are valid information that needs to be in a collection system. You don't really need that for the DAMs. The DAMs need the information that they have.
Right. Well, they're different workflows for different DAMs.
Having said that, my ideal picture is one where the collection management system and the DAMs have shared storage, so that you get rid of all this exporting in and out, and basically that you share the same data from 2 different views.
Well, and I want to play devil's advocate on that, for the fact that, because we're looking at this ourselves, because the chief curator approached me about possibility of, which I'm also a new media artist as well, about actually starting to collect new media artwork, which is mostly time-based, file-based digital artwork. And well, then you get to the point, then you have to deal with the collection management on side of it, and then you also have to deal with the digital asset management side of it. So then they really do need to be talking to each other at the same time. But that's one of the reasons why we haven't really upgraded anything yet, because we're like, where do we go? What do we do? Who do we go with? That kind of thing. So
I think they need
it's a long
to talk
process.
to each other, but I don't think they need to be the same.
Yeah, it's making our collection manager really, really nervous, because she's like, no, I don't want to mess with that.
We collect new media
Okay.
The thing is, in terms of preservation and transcoding, is that when it becomes an aesthetic sensibility, transcoding becomes a very discussion. So
Right.
it's interesting to hear the conversation about moving to this, moving to that, moving to this, and a lot of times it's from aesthetic and sort of artistic things, which I
Right.
think for using the collection movement is really something that is a discussion.
It's really a philosophical discussion that we've been getting into along the same lines. Is if you transcode something, is it faithful to the original artist's representation or idea of what that piece of art actually is? So
It's complicated.
It's
I'm
very
also
complicated.
I'm also a media artist,
and
and
that's
so
another piece
yeah,
of metadata,
yeah.
and that's something you have to have the artist sign off. Yes, can we transcode it? No, can we not transcode it? And that's something that has to be included in
Well,
the rights
yeah, and
registration portion.
It's almost it's something that I addressed in my thesis, which was sort of looking at Solowitz's model for his installations, right? And as an installation video artist, you need to set rules for transcodes, for formats, for types of players that can be used, limitations of resolutions, as well as the physical space. And so building on that concept as an artist. And I think that it's interesting because a lot of artists don't necessarily go there. They make the video and put it out there. And as an artist who's also a museum nerd, I'm in a very conflicted space. So I think it's a really interesting conversation. Is who advises that artist, and as a museum, do you pull that artist's leg and throw them into a dam just because they don't have a clue?
So is this a plea to keep the hardware graveyard?
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
I don't go there. I'm not Namjoon.
I mean, I could tell you from like on some of my personal artwork that I do, I actually go and manipulate like transcoding and the actual files and do stuff like, well, I'll take, do a search in Google and I'll manipulate all that stuff and then come out. So then you have that to deal with, and then what do you keep with that? So if you transcode what someone already did as a transcoded kind of art project, is it completely change it? It probably does. So then you're into this. Can you do it, or you have to get that artist's permission if they're still around, whatever. So it's kind of it's a toss up. So I don't know. It's a very sticky situation.
We just chalk things off as ephemeral.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you gotta hit your bets, I guess.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I hope this is the beginning of a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I'd like to keep yammering about it.
And I think it needs to be like where we do need to collaborate as as associates, as in this field, that we really need to really start focusing on this, because I struggle with it, and I'm sure everyone else does too. So we really kind of this way.
You made the comment that everybody wants you to keep making this video. Is there anyone at your organizations that are standing up and saying, or picking and choosing what to get rid of? Or are you setting deadlines for possible picking and choosing?
It's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, because it came from our board, we're and they hold the purse strings basically. We're recording everything. I'm kind of making, I guess, the executive decision right now of what type of file from what we record that we keep. And then the reason is because I don't have any guidelines to go by, because there was nothing set in stone. I'm actually having to write everything for the museum, because when I got to the museum, there was no multimedia department at all. So I created the department from scratch, and so it's kind of I'm doing it as I go. So there's no hard and fast rules of what I have to do right now. So it's kind of, I'm keeping what I think we should have, and with the amount of storage and the amount of resources that I have available to me.
So would a collection policy help you?
Collection policy would help me, like for digital assets, yes. And I'm currently trying to hash that out between collections management, between our public relations department, and our curatorial department. So that's a conversation that and I don't know about you, but talking, you know, like a lot of museums and this one, mine in particular. You know, you have that silo kind of mentality where everyone's in their own little bitty world and not really collaborating with each other. So it's hard to get everyone together and say, okay, we need to do this, try to get on the same page. So that's the struggle right now, and that's what we're trying to kind of go through. So we're trying to get through it. So.
Actually, just thinking, one quick last question for those of you who do collect media art or who create media art. For those organizations that do collect it, and primarily from the artists themselves, have you put in your acquisitions policy that the artist understands that we may have to transcode and that we may have to migrate?
It's not in our acquisition policy, but it's in our services, which is our sort of thing. So it gives us a preservation clause, which says for future preservation, we would like to migrate to performances like that. So there is language for new media company, but it's not like the collections management policy, it's not a licensing agreement.
Yeah, we have something kind of similar that we're trying to hash through right now, but it's essentially that in the future, as things become more obsolete, and then we have that kind of clause in there. It's like it's more of the rights and, you know, limited user rights or whatever, things like that.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we're still and we haven't really collected any new media art. My chief curator is he's kind of getting into it. He's kind of getting excited about it. So so he came to me and asked me, well, what should we do with this and this and this? So that's what we're working through right now between myself and the collections department. So.
And it doesn't always happen. It's always like, I think that's the one place that there's a lot of discussion.
Yeah, and like as a new media artist that does manipulate transcoding and manipulating metadata itself, that becomes a big sticking point, because then if you transcode it after it got transcoded, it could be completely different. So, yeah. Anything else? I think it's time. Well, thank you.